Hello and welcome to London College of Fashion's 2025 School of Media and Communication postgraduate podcasts. I'm Bex Cassie, Creative Director for the School of Media and Communication, and I'm excited to introduce this series of discussions, which highlights the work from students on the MA Fashion Curation and Cultural Programming course. In this series, we'll be discussing key themes that are shaping the future of fashion, from exploring exhibition dialogues as catalysts for change, to the intersection of physical and digital spaces in fashion exhibitions, and the process of navigating research to uncover and share meaningful fashion narratives. These conversations provide a deeper look into the ideas and practices that are redefining how we curate, present, and understand fashion in today's world. Whether you're in the fashion industry or simply interested in where it's heading, we hope you'll find these discussions insightful. Thanks for tuning in. We're glad you're here.
I'm Dr. Sienna Madsen, course leader for MA Fashion Curation and Cultural Programming. I'm joined by three of my graduates from the class of 2024-2025 today. And I think rather than me introduce them, I think I'll allow them to introduce themselves and give us a kind of brief one-sentence elevator pitch about their master's degree research. Lucy, did you want to take it away?
Hi, I'm Lucy Jenna Brown, and my final project was looking into the wardrobe of Barbara Hepworth and telling an alternate biography to her well-known story through the reading of her clothes.
Wonderful, thank you. Zoe?
Hi, I'm Zoe Taharatu, and my project is about 1930s women photographers in Germany, capturing a new sense of femininity in fashion photography, just before the rise of fascism in Germany, but also in Europe in general.
Great, thank you.
And hi, I'm Pauline Smith. So my dissertation was titled Collecting the Collective Mediterranean, Address and Identity in Marseille. So I was very focused in my hometown of Marseille, studying the people there. So it was more of an anthropological study and assessing how the younger generation of Marseille has reinvented the Mediterranean identity through their clothing.
Wonderful, thank you. So I wanted to kick off our discussion today with Zoe. So you've discussed the way you've looked at photography to find fashion narratives. So how did you unpick those narratives using visual sources?
Yeah. So of course, thinking about fashion, at first I went to fashion photography, but because that wasn't always clear back then, because it was women, those people that I'm researching, taking pictures and then maybe publishing them, or maybe also not publishing them. So there's not a clear definition of fashion photography back then, if it wasn't related to advertising.
Right.
So I started looking at of all of their works, basically, everything they captured. And it started with travel photography. So you had images of everyone just in that casual clothing and beachwear. So that was the first idea of fashion, just capturing fashion in a very casual sense, not for any bigger picture of capturing fashion for the industry.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of capturing fashion. But then it evolved into something that we maybe define as fashion photography today. So advertising and women's magazines, because they were really big back then at the time. So yeah, fashion photography in those women's magazines, which is a bit more easy to research because you have magazines you can look at, you have the literature that you can look at. So yeah, it's been a bit difficult because, of course, fashion curation, you think about clothing, you think about objects, so that's what's been missing a bit, maybe. So yeah, trying to redefine fashion curation by not just looking at objects but also looking at fashion photography, so something that's not necessarily a material that you can touch and not as tactile, maybe.
It's kind of capturing the dress itself, I suppose. as not as much as the material objects, but kind
Yeah.
of the essence of the full look.
Yeah. It's dressing, it's identity, and then also it's very political as well at that time. So women, or especially this group of women, they were wearing trousers, they were wearing short sleeved shirts, something that was very frowned upon then when fascism rose. So it's identity, it's politics,
Yeah.
and
I don't know. Great. Thank you. And Lucy, your research started with a discovery.
Yes.
And it's absolutely fascinating. So tell us about the discovery of surviving garments from Barbara Hepworth's wardrobe.
Okay, so my project actually started in the first term of the course. So for the first project, I really wanted to focus on an exhibition plan for sort of telling a woman's story. And Barbara Hepworth, a British sculptor, she was someone that always interested me. I live in Cornwall, so geographically she's of huge interest to me.
Because she lived in Cornwall.
Yeah, she lived and worked in Cornwall. And she was really inspired by Cornwall, sort of really importantly. So I just happened to contact her estate, and her granddaughter made contact with me, and no one had ever asked about the clothes. Obviously, everyone's interested in the sculpture. And they told me that they had her clothes amongst the family. So the clothing, the remaining clothing collection was divided between two of the granddaughters. So one set is in Penzance in Cornwall, and the other is in London. Barbara Hepworth tragically died in a fire in her house and studio. So that was the initial thought, that none of the clothes remained. So to discover these sort of two small collections of clothing that had survived was really interesting. Then being invited to go along and view these items was both really interesting, but also as a newish student going in and seeing these items. The first location in bags under a bed covered in cat's hair was a real. I didn't really know what to do. I felt a little bit out of my depth, but also sort of knew that there was something really, really special here. So at that point, I sort of realised, with the help of tutors, that this was probably more of a final project than a first project, because there was a lot of work to do on covering the story behind these pieces.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a dream scenario, and then also a real kind of challenge to what do you do with something that's been left to sit so long.
Yeah, and also sort of navigating the relationship with the family when, to me, these items are really important, and they can see the importance because it's their grandmother's clothing. But at the same time, there's so many other sort of business things that capture that they need immediate attention. This is not a second thought to them, and they're also their personal items. So it's been a bit of a journey navigating the relationships with them.
Yeah, definitely. It really highlights the emotional value of it, I think. Yeah, great. And Pauline, your research draws upon contemporary oral testimony from residents of Marseille to contextualize what you bring forward as a Mediterranean identity. How important was it to speak directly to people living in this geography for your research?
It was very important because when I first started researching on Mediterranean identity, I found that the sources were very thin. And a lot of resources were mostly focused on Mediterranean history and politics, or more on scientific, like climates and such. And so there was nothing on Mediterranean clothing as a whole and fashioning Mediterranean identity. So I really had to start from the beginning, and that's why I figured I have to talk to the people who are living through this fashion, especially because my study is very contemporary focused. So I'm very interested in the younger generation, so 18 to 30-year-olds, and those aren't usually the people that are able to write books and publications about their experience living through Mediterranean fashion. And I also didn't want to also talk to people who were academics or curation practitioners. And so it was very important for me to talk to just regular people who didn't even know anything about fashion, who didn't think themselves part of this fashion world, and to really be able to give them a voice. That's what I tried to do in my project, which is why I also tried to create an accessible language, which we'll discuss later. But it was very, very important for me to be able to talk to the source, to the people directly, and that's why I did street interviews and the more formal interviews as well. But I was very, very interested in these kind of casual street interviews, going out on the street, interviewing random people.
Yeah. It's a really interesting way of kind of taking theory and putting it into practice, because you can't really divide the two things. I think what's really interesting about all three of your research projects is the way that it captures the everyday. So whether it's kind of, there's probably some spectacular pieces in there, but the everyday clothing of an artist, and then finding fashion within these images of potentially everyday, lives. And then, of course, as you said, empowering people to understand that they are part of fashion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wonder if, and whoever wants to go first can jump in, but I wonder if you could speak about the challenges you might have come up against in helping people that you're working with, or maybe looking at source material to understand that the everyday is fashion as well.
I think one of the biggest challenges was the lack of material, because I think you also mentioned that a lot of the stuff you're studying is not material products. It's like more images and whatever's left, and I think that's very hard for everyday clothing. It's hard to find existent clothing, especially if you're going far back as you are. So I think that for me, that was one of the biggest challenges, because I was trying to represent lives lived within clothing without having the clothing, because they lost their value if they weren't worn.
Yeah.
So for everyday clothing, I found that was my biggest challenge.
Because things break, and then you won't keep them, right? You might give them, if they're still okay, you might give them to your niece or something, but you don't have an archive at home.
My challenge was that the iconic image of Barbara Hepworth is her in her workwear, like wearing boiler suits and trousers and a scarf, and none of those items survive. So what is left are the fur coats, which were also a signature look for her, and also a whole collection of clothes that you wouldn't associate with her, which are silk pieces in bright colours, because the majority of photographs of her were black and white. So the lack of the everyday wear for Barbara Hepworth has sort of been a blessing and a curse, because it's allowed me to uncover a different side to her that people don't imagine, and having access, because her life is so well documented, having access to the archive at the Tate, which has got all of her letters, being able to delve into that and see how important fashion and clothes were to her has been a real eye-opener. She wasn't just utilitarian, she really cared about how she looked.
I mean, even when you were saying that she was wearing boiler suit, but had a little scarf, you can tell it's someone who's obviously caring about fashion.
Yeah, and she always wore the most amazing statement jewelry, and she, for someone who's so aesthetically driven, of course she's going to care about what she was wearing. And also, in her, when she was rising in fame, it was the 60s. She was then having to come from Cornwall to London and attend sort of fashionable parties with bright young things. So she really cared about how she was looking, how she was presenting herself.
Yeah, it can be really. I mean, it's very illuminating. We all know this, and we're all, I think, it's preaching to the choir, but how illuminating clothing can be about personalities. Pauline, I wonder if there's anything that emerged during your research and when you were speaking to people living in Marseille, if there was anything that could have emerged in terms of identity that you found as a kind of through line. So what makes a Mediterranean identity? Is there one thing that's consistent?
That was one of my questions. I was like, what is the Mediterranean identity? What does it mean, especially in clothing? And at the beginning, I was really looking for that one unifying thing. And in the end, I said it in my conclusion as well. I was like, actually, I was wrong the whole time. There is no one Mediterranean identity. That's not a thing. And that's the beauty of it, is that because it's obviously a huge region, there's going to be several culture, which sometimes clash, but sometimes they'll mix quite well. And it's actually this whole multiculturalism, all of these plural identities that'll combine into, and that's what creates the Mediterranean. There are several, not just one. And even I created this little map of Marseille, trying to identify neighborhoods and trying to find if there were different fashions within each neighborhood. And there was. So even within Marseille, which is like a smaller area, it's not the whole Mediterranean, there were still different fashions depending on which neighborhood you were born and where you were and such.
Yeah, it's nice to have those discoveries where you think you know something and then you realize you don't know anything, or you learn something entirely new.
There's still so much I don't.
Exactly, and I guess that's one of the things that keeps us researching, as it never really ends. You could go on forever. Zoe, I wonder if, we've talked about kind of moments of discovery. I wonder if there's anything that's been kind of surprising or exciting that's emerged from doing this.
Yeah, so there was this motive of nature in 1930s pop culture, going back to the countryside. And with the Nazi Party, they tried to abuse that then with their politics, kind of pushing women back into very domestic jobs and, back into the kitchen, basically. And so they were producing propaganda imagery and advertisement showing women in nature and, going back to the good old days, this is what a woman wants now. And so this juxtaposition of these women capturing this very genuine sense of freedom just before the Second World War, and then the Nazi Party kind of using that as propaganda. It was very interesting to see. I never thought there would be a connection like that, but
and it just I suppose it just goes to show that how valuable photographs are as kind of evidence of lived lives, and it really it depends who's behind the camera, really. Or how those photographs are used.
And also fashion photography. Like, no one would ever think that fashion photography could be so closely connected to world politics and like a tragedy, basically. But yeah, it was very interesting, very in-depth. I had to go through so much material. But yeah.
Great. So Lucy, kind of switch gears here. Your research proposed a site-specific exhibition for Hepworth's wardrobe. And you've discussed Cornwall a little bit as her place of living and working and practicing. So tell us about the site that you proposed for your exhibition and why this is important to telling Hepworth's story.
So Hepworth moved from London down to Cornwall at the start of the Second World War to sort of escape. And there was already a colony of artists there, so she was amongst friends, and she completely fell in love with the place and was completely inspired. She then went on to have a studio right in the heart of St Ives, which is a little fishing village. And as she was sort of growing in popularity and she was getting more successful, she then had the means to buy larger materials, so she wanted to develop larger scale sculptures. Okay. So opposite where her studio was St Ives' old dance hall, so it's called the Palais de Danse, which was also a cinema at one point. So at this stage in her career, so this was 1965, I think, this building come up for sale. And there's a rumour that she basically said, unless I get this building, I'm leaving St Ives. So black flannel laid down the gauntlet. So once she'd acquired this space, which had a big dance hall space, she then had the space to produce these bigger sculptures, which one of them is the sculpture which is outside the UN in New York. Wow. So that was the point when, of course, she then was elevated even more. So this building has sat empty since her death in 1975. It was handed over from the Hepworth family to the Tate in St Ives maybe it was a few years ago. I can't remember exactly when. So they've had a project going for the last few years to regenerate this space because it's laid dormant. So for me, it was really important for her clothes to come back to this space and almost like a homecoming, because this space was really important to her. And there's talk about her. She had all the sculptures in this space on plinths on wheels, and she would dance with the sculptures. So it's sort of connecting to the original dance hall theme. So from the start, I knew that's where I wanted it to be. And I also then I decided not to include any sculpture in the exhibition, but sort of connected places where visitors to the exhibition could then go and see the sculptures in situ in St Ives.
So great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a nice way of kind of, when we talk about fashion curation and cultural programming, it's really the kind of expansive view of fashion. How do you take it beyond an exhibition space? So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Great. And Zoe, I wanted to talk about when we're thinking about space. So you come from an architecture background, and I was wondering if thinking about spatial design has come into play when you're on doing your research project, which is, very much looking at a fixed space in the photograph, or if it's impacted the development of your practice more widely.
Yeah. I think so. I'm a very visual person and I'm very intuitive. So starting this project was very much me seeing one image and then being like, oh, there's some connection. I can't quite put it into words yet. But I saw these images and then this space kind of opened up in my head. I don't know, I imagine space as just very intuitively, I think. And then because most of the images were outside in nature, I just envisioned, light speckles, greenery maybe. But yeah, space is definitely a very, very big part of my practice and just thinking in general. From the initial idea, space is very much a part of my research. But then also, my project's not going to be an exhibition proposal, but going into an exhibition proposal is also very closely related to space with my practice or what I've been doing in this past projects. So just thinking about like the psychology of spaces. Is it going to be a white space? Is the ceiling going to be really low? Are you going to feel like you have to run through the space? All these little things that you might not necessarily think about.
But it's funny, I feel like all three of us have space very much in mind, like the environment and the impact and influence of environment on our practice and on the clothing we're studying. Like you at Cornwall, you at the gallery space and the space. Mediterranean obviously impacts a lot of my research.
Yeah. Like fashion's not in a vacuum, right?
Great. And Polly, we had a teaser at the beginning of our conversation about the language you used in your final master's project. And it's very considered and it's very deliberate. And I wonder if you could speak about how you wrote your master's project and why it was important to write it that way.
So obviously I did the dissertation, which is 17,000 words. And my reflection was that, okay, it's quite a long text. It's quite a large chunk of text. And I kind of went through different stages. I remember the first time I submitted my abstract and kind of an introduction of it. My language was deliberately extremely casual because my idea was that I wanted to make this an easy read, kind of almost like a fiction, like a little novel that you could read for fun more than an academic text that you had to focus on the words, think about every sentence. I wanted to be very flowy. Kind of the word I was looking for is flow. Just kind of you can read through it quite easily. So the first abstract I had submitted is very, very casual, and my tutor Jeff told me I need to rein it in a little bit. So I took it down a notch, and my final product was kind of a blend of a academic dissertation and a more easily read text. And the reason for that was because I was considering my audience a lot as well. As I said, I studied everyday clothing, everyday people, and I wanted to be able to reach an audience that wasn't necessarily reading academic text. So hopefully
you wanted it to be for the people you were studying.
Exactly. It was a dissertation by Mediterranean for the Mediterranean. But I did have some concern when I submitted. I was like, oh my God, should I have done that? Because I had let my dad read it. He's a PhD, very academic, and he said, no, I don't like this. This is awful. This is not what you want for a dissertation. Have you talked to your tutors about this? And I was like, oh, too late. I guess I'm submitting it. And it paid off, thankfully.
And here you
I
are.
think the tutors understood, thank God, but also because we had a conversation before about that. But yeah, it was very much the aim of it to be as casual as you can be in a dissertation.
Yeah.
Could you explain that in your methodology?
I did. I'd like outlines for key right there. I didn't just, hey, right guys, this out his my dissertation. I did gave a detailed explanation of why I was doing this, and it wasn't just because I didn't have the level. Academic, it was a deliberate choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think being clear about your research methods or your research methodology is so important because it gives you that latitude to then, explore and branch out and experiment. So thinking then about kind of experimentation and exploration on the course, I was wondering if each of you, and again, maybe we'll start with Lucy and we'll go around the table. If there was a specific moment or a workshop or a seminar during your time on fashion curation and cultural programming at LCF that was pivotal to informing your research or practice. So it might not be necessarily a master's project itself, but just something that's gone clicked with you and you're like, yeah, that's it.
I think we had Amy and Judith, and we did the button for someone. Yeah, Amy laid out a whole collection of buttons. We all had to choose one, and then we had to join teams and we had to make a story. And she was basically teaching us how you are a collector and how you curate. And we were getting quite possessive over these buttons and wanting to swap with other people. But I think for me, that was such a simple way of getting across curation and collecting. Yeah, it was really, really effective. That loved that session.
Awesome. Zoe?
It's a bit difficult. There's so many memories. I mean, this course has been way too short. We were just saying that we could have easily done 2 years. I think for me personally, it was a talk. I think it was LCF sampled. It was about a PhD student presenting their work, and it was about modes of research. Right. And they were talking about free association and creative research methodologies. And because I don't come from an academic background, I was really struggling with keeping a really tight structure and working, from A to B and C and D. But just kind of accepting my way of working, accepting my way of research, and then really doing free writing exercises, just going with my intuition, going with what I think would work, and then finding proof, finding references, and then also talking to people, seeing if they see that there's a connection. Yeah. So just accepting that everyone's research journey is different, and then just
finding your own.
Yeah, finding your own way, because it didn't work for me at first. I was really struggling. I think that was one of the moments. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's hard to pin down to one workshop because it really is the whole year that allowed us to really experiment. And I was coming from a very academic background, history of art, UCL. It's very essay writing. You're reading text, you're looking at paintings. That's it.
Yeah.
And when I arrived here, I realized that a lot of our teachers were doing a lot of different practices. Like, for instance, Jeff was doing a lot of physical outputs that I never thought of. Just doing brainstorming on creating this mind map.
Yeah.
And that really helped me. Or Claire Wilcox's class on creative writing in your practice, and that inspired me to bring in creative writing to my dissertation. And even just hearing about other people's projects when we had the PowerPoint presentation on everyone's project, that was really, really helpful because I realized, oh, wow, people are doing a lot of different things. And I was happy to find out that I could do a lot more with my MA and my MA project that I thought I could in the beginning. Yeah, so it's great.
I mean, there's no one way to do research. There's no one way to practice. And I think that's, the beauty of working in our field is that there's a lot of room for different approaches to thinking about fashion. collecting fashion, exhibiting fashion, holding fashion events. So now that you're here, we're sitting at the other end of the journey. Do you have any advice for future MA Fashion Curation and Cultural Programming students? Pauline.
We were talking about this earlier, and we were talking about research and the research process, and how, as we said before, it just never stops.
Yeah.
So when you decide, like, it's really hard to decide when to stop the research and start writing. But I think my best advice would be to write while you're doing research, because realistically, you're going to write and you're going to find new things to research about it. And it's just really a continuing movement. And even when you're done with your project, there's always more research you can do, and you can keep this going. So you've got to learn when to research and when to write. Elsewise, you'll keep researching all the way, so you'll never stop.
Yeah. Great. Zoe, do you have any words of wisdom?
Yeah. I think the best thing about this course is that you have so many opportunities, that there's so many different routes you can go. So I came in wanting to study fashion exhibitions from a very spatial with a very spatial approach, like exhibition design and all of that. But yeah, the course is so, like, there's so many things you're learning. There's so many new, I don't know,
new ways of thinking about fashion.
Yeah, fashion curation is such it's so niche, but it's also so broad. Like, you can basically do anything what you want. So it's good if you come into the course with an idea, but I would say be open-minded, be very, go with the flow, see what emerges, see what you're interested in, and then also really just stick with what you're interested in. Again, maybe that's just my way of thinking, but
it can make sense. It's the difference. Also, something that what you've been interested in for a long time, because this is both a long project.
Yeah, that's it. Listen to your gut, and everyone's doing amazing projects, but at the end of the day, you have to go through your own project. Like, it's a journey you have to do alone, kind of. So, be open-minded, but also stick to what you'll be happy working with, I think. Great.
I think for me as well, it's like just to immerse yourself in it. Like, the tutors on the course are you're all in the industry, like, you're all the top of your game. That's such a source of knowledge, but also to go to the exhibitions and really, like, just immerse yourself in it, because it's a short course.
It is, yeah.
It flies by.
Yeah. And it is that whole, like we've all said, like, you suddenly realise that all the projects are just a process. There is no right or wrong answer, and it doesn't end. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So, what's next? What projects do you have on the go? What are you thinking about doing next, Lucy?
I would really, really like to see my proposed exhibition happen. I mean, that's a dream scenario. So I'm sort of currently trying to sort of get a little bit of work so that I then can also focus on doing a bit more research and giving myself a go to sort of get this off the ground.
Great,
Yeah.
Thank you. Zoe?
I haven't handed in just yet, so I'm still working on my thesis. I have about a month left, so I'm in the midst of it. But for now, after submitting, I think I would like to work in an archive, like a brand archive. Just really becoming a specialist for a brand, maybe even working with designers and, like, contemporary fashion. I think that's what interests me the most at the moment, but that might change as well in a month, so
There you go.
we'll see.
And for my dissertation, I would like to be able to publish it in some journals. I want to submit it as well to this conference that's taking place in Gibraltar on just anything Mediterranean related. So I'd love to be able to take part in that. But elsewise, I was really thinking of taking this research project further. I would like to create kind of an online record of stories in Marseille and just push what I've just begun a little bit further and really start collecting all these stories of wearing in Marseille and maybe beyond. Yeah.
And making it again accessible to the people. that
Exactly,
you're
exactly.
talking about. Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you very much.